The click of my hotel room door barely registered as it swung closed behind me. My body felt like lead, worn down from a grueling business trip and the long flight back. The hotel bed beckoned, promising a few short hours of solace before morning meetings. But just as I began unbuttoning my shirt, my phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. I sighed, thinking it might be a work email or another late-night task from my boss, Rachel. Instead, it was Rachel herself, her voice brisk and apologetic. "Michael, I need you back in the office by 8 a.m. Something's come up," she said. "No exceptions, eh?" I muttered, already calculating the impossible logistics of an overnight flight and the hours ahead. "Sorry, Michael. I'll make it up to you," she promised before hanging up. I stared at the phone, my plans for rest evaporating. No choice but to pack up and head home. I thought briefly of calling Emily, my wife of 9 years, but it was well past midnight. She'd be asleep, along with our 2 kids, Hope and Jack. The thought of waking them stopped me. It would be easier just to slip in quietly, grab what I needed, and head out again without disturbing anyone. The neighborhood was eerily silent as I pulled into our driveway a little after 1 a.m. The glow of the porch light softened the edges of our home, making it look inviting, safe. I killed the engine and grabbed my bags, moving quietly toward the door. Inside, the house was dark except for a faint, flickering light coming from upstairs. The soft hum of voices reached me as I placed my keys on the counter. For a moment, I hesitated. The kids? No, it couldn't be. They were probably staying at Emily's sister's place, as they often did when I traveled. That left only one explanation. A cold knot formed in my stomach. My mind scrambled for alternatives, an innocent explanation. Some way this wasn't what it seemed. Maybe Emily was on a late-night call with a friend, or, I don't know, anything but what my gut was screaming at me. I crept up the stairs, my socked feet barely making a sound on the hardwood. As I reached the landing, the voices became clearer. A man's voice, low, confident, familiar, and then Emily's laugh. That laugh, it was light, carefree, and intimate, a sound she hadn't made for me in months. My vision narrowed as I approached the partially closed bedroom door, the light spilling into the hallway. I could see them through the gap. Emily perched on the edge of our bed, her hand resting on a man's thigh. His back was to me, but it didn't matter. I knew. David. A neighbor. A supposed friend. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides as I fought to control the fire roaring in my chest. A flood of memories flashed through my mind. Emily holding our newborn son for the first time. The way she kissed my temple when I came home late from work. The promises we'd made on our wedding day. All of it shattered. I forced myself to step back into the shadows, my breath coming in sharp bursts. The advice my grandfather had drilled into me echoed in my head. Never act in anger, Michael. You can't take back a word or a fist once it's thrown. He was right. If I burst in now, I'd lose control. I needed proof. Pulling out my phone, I adjusted the settings to record. The camera was state-of-the-art, sharp enough to capture every damning detail. I hit record, steadying the device as I captured the scene. Emily leaned closer to David, her voice dropping into a whisper that I strained to catch. I didn't need to hear every word to understand the betrayal unfolding before me. When David spoke, his tone was mocking. "Come on, Em. Are you really going to keep pretending this guy matters to you?" My jaw tightened, and I gritted my teeth hard enough to hurt. Emily's response sent a chill through me. "I told you, David. I'm yours. None of it matters anymore." Something inside me snapped. I don't remember crossing the room, but suddenly, I was there. David barely had time to turn before my shoulder slammed into his chest, sending him sprawling onto the floor. "What the hell?" he shouted, scrambling backward as I loomed over him. "Get out!" My voice was low, dangerous. He didn't move fast enough. I grabbed him by the collar, yanking him to his feet. I said, "Get out, or so help me." "Michael, stop!" Emily's voice was shrill, trembling. She clutched a blanket to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. I ignored her, shoving David toward the door. He stumbled, tripping over his shoes in his haste to escape. When the door slammed behind him, I turned back to Emily. She flinched, retreating into the corner like a trapped animal. Get over here. My voice was cold, devoid of emotion. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as if she might make a run for it. I said, get over here. Finally, she crawled forward on her knees, her hands trembling as they gripped the edge of the bed. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I'm so sorry, Michael, she whispered. I didn't mean. Don't. I cut her off, my voice sharp. Don't you dare insult me with that. The words poured out of me, fueled by the deep ache in my chest. Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed this family. Our kids. Our home. You brought him into our bed, Emily. Our bed. She sobbed, shaking her head. I never meant for it to go this far. I was lonely, and you were always traveling. And enough. The word cracked like a whip, silencing her. I stared at her, searching for a trace of the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with. But all I saw was a stranger. You'll pack your things and be out of this house by noon, I said, my voice steady now. Take every reminder of this mess. Especially de bed. She nodded, her head bowed, her tears falling freely. What am I supposed to do? Where will I go? I don't care. Call those brothers of yours, the ones I've bailed out more times than I can count. Figure it out. Noon, Emily. Not a second later. I left the room without another word, grabbing my bags from the entryway. As I passed a mirror in the hall, my reflection stopped me. My face was a mess, blood trickling from my nose, bruises blooming along my cheekbone. I hadn't even felt the pain until now. The drive to the hospital was a blur, my thoughts swirling in a storm of rage, betrayal, and disbelief. The doctor's words barely registered as they diagnosed a broken nose and a possible concussion. They wanted to admit me, but I refused. I had work to do, decisions to make, and a life to rebuild from the rubble Emily had left behind. For now, I had enough to get started. Proof of her betrayal, a deadline for her departure, and an iron resolve to ensure she'd never have the chance to destroy me again. The sterile smell of disinfectant stung my nose as I sat on the hospital gurney, my ribs aching with every breath. The adrenaline had worn off on the drive over, leaving behind a dull, persistent throb across my body. A nurse finished taping up my cracked ribs while a young doctor adjusted his glasses and read my chart. You've got a broken nose, 2 cracked ribs, and a mild concussion, he said in a clipped tone, his pen scratching across the paper. You're lucky it wasn't worse. Lucky? I thought. I didn't feel lucky. The doctor continued, his voice almost detached. You should stay overnight for observation. No, I said, shaking my head despite the wave of dizziness that followed. I've got work in a few hours. I'll manage. The doctor sighed but didn't argue, scribbling a prescription for painkillers and handing it over. At least take it easy. And no heavy lifting, he added before moving on to his next patient. I watched him go, wondering how someone could speak so clinically about broken bones and bruises. But maybe that's what happens when you've seen it all before, when other people's pain becomes just another task on a to-do list. I shoved the prescription into my pocket, knowing I wouldn't fill it. Painkillers dulled more than the physical aches, and I needed my mind sharp for what came next. The sun was just beginning to rise as I parked outside the office, its rays slicing through the cold morning air. I leaned against the steering wheel for a moment, letting the stillness settle over me. My head pounded, my ribs screamed with every breath, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that I had a plan. The recording on my phone was the linchpin, a damning piece of evidence that could change everything. Emily's voice still echoed in my mind, her words cutting deeper than any blow. I'm yours. None of it matters anymore. Not the kids. Not our marriage. Nothing. I exhaled sharply and stepped out of the car, the weight of the day pressing down on me. Laura was already at her desk when I arrived, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took in my disheveled appearance. Michael, she said, her voice tinged with concern. What happened to you? I hesitated, debating how much to tell her. Laura had always been more than just a boss. She was a confidant, someone who'd backed me through thick and thin. If anyone could handle the truth, it was her. I came home to an unwelcome surprise. I said finally, my voice tight. Caught Emily with someone else. Her mouth tightened into a thin line, but she didn't press for details. Instead, she gestured toward the private bathroom in her office. Go clean up? You look like you've been through hell. I nodded gratefully, stepping inside to wash the dried blood from my face and try to make myself look halfway presentable. When I emerged, Laura was waiting with a cup of coffee and a business card. This is Sylvia, she said, sliding the card across the desk. She's a friend from college and the best divorce lawyer I know. Call her. Today. I took the card, my fingers curling around it tightly. Thanks, Laura. I mean it. She gave me a small, encouraging smile. You've got this, Michael. Just stay focused. Don't let your emotions get the better of you. I nodded, her words hitting home. Sylvia's office was on the other side of town, a sleek, modern space that exuded efficiency. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her eyes sharp and assessing. Michael, Laura told me a bit about your situation, she began, motioning for me to sit. Why don't you start from the beginning? I recounted everything. Emily's betrayal, the confrontation, and the recording. Sylvia listened intently, her expression unreadable as I pulled out my phone and played the audio. The moment Emily's voice filled the room, Sylvia's brow furrowed. When David's mocking tone chimed in, she shook her head slightly. But it was Emily's chilling confession that seemed to strike a nerve. I am yours. None of it matters anymore. Sylvia leaned back in her chair, her lips pressing into a thin line. That's damning, she said finally. But it might not be enough for full custody. Courts tend to favor shared arrangements unless there's clear evidence of harm to the children. She said they don't matter to her. I countered, my voice rising. How can that not be enough? Sylvia held up a hand, her tone calm but firm. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, Michael. But judges look at patterns, not isolated incidents. We'll need more. More. The word echoed in my mind, heavy with implication. After our meeting, I returned to the office, my thoughts racing. Laura glanced up as I walked in, her gaze questioning. Well, she asked. She's good, I said, dropping into the chair opposite her desk. But this isn't going to be easy. Emily's going to fight. Laura's expression softened. And so will you. You got more to fight for, Michael. Don't forget that. Her words were a balm to the raw edges of my anger, grounding me in the reality of what mattered most. Hope and Jack. They were my anchor, the reason I couldn't let this break me. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, I replayed the recording over and over. Each time, the weight of Emily's words pressed down on me, suffocating in their finality. I thought about Hope's laughter, the way her face lit up when she saw me walk through the door. I thought about Jack's tiny hands clutching mine, his trust in me absolute and unshakable. They deserved better. They deserved stability, safety, and love. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found Sylvia's name. I need full custody, I said when she answered, my voice steady. I don't care what it takes. Just tell me what I have to do. Sylvia was silent for a moment, then replied, It's going to be a battle, Michael. But if you're committed, we'll make it happen. As the days passed, I threw myself into the work of rebuilding. Every decision, every action, was calculated and deliberate, a means to secure a future for my kids and sever the ties that bound me to Emily's betrayal. I met with Sylvia regularly, gathering evidence and preparing for the inevitable courtroom showdown. Laura was a constant source of support, her calm pragmatism keeping me grounded when my emotions threatened to spiral out of control. And through it all, the recording remained my touchstone, a stark reminder of why I was fighting and what was at stake. By the time Emily's move-out deadline came and went, the house felt emptier but lighter, as if her absence had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't just surviving. I was taking control, and I wouldn't stop until my children were safe, my future was secure, and the scars Emily had left behind were nothing more than faint echoes of a life I'd left behind. By the time I arrived back at the house, Emily's brothers were already there. carrying her belongings to a rental truck parked in the driveway. A part of me felt relief at seeing her life packed into boxes and loaded away, but there was no denying the bitterness that came with it. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. Every box they carried out represented the damage she'd done, not just to me, but to our kids, Hope and Jack. The first sign that something was wrong came when I noticed Emily's brothers arguing near the truck. One of them, Daniel, held up a small plastic bag filled with white powder. My stomach tightened as I realized what it was. "Michael," Daniel called, his voice sharp. "You want to explain this?" I approached cautiously, my eyes narrowing at the bag. "Explain what?" "This was in one of Emily's boxes," he said, holding it up like an accusation. I didn't bother to hide my anger. "That's a question for Emily, not me." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of a car door slamming caught our attention. I turned to see two police officers stepping out of their cruiser. The taller of the two, a woman with sharp eyes and an authoritative presence, approached us. "Mr. Lane?" she asked, her gaze flicking between me and the bag Daniel was holding. "That's me," I said, standing straighter. "I'm Sergeant Anna Clark," she said, introducing herself with a quick nod. "We receive a report about a possible disturbance here." "What's going on?" It took me a few minutes to explain the situation, that I was divorcing Emily and that her brothers were helping her move out. I pointed to the bag of powder in Daniel's hand. "That's what we need to talk about," I said. "It's not mine, and I'd bet my house it belongs to Emily." Sergeant Clark raised an eyebrow. "Mind if we take a look at the rest of her belongings?" "Be my guest," I replied, stepping aside. As the officers began sifting through Emily's boxes, I couldn't help but notice Anna's methodical approach. She was calm, professional, and thorough, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The search turned up more than just a bag of powder. In one of the boxes, tucked beneath a pile of clothes, was a small mirror dusted with a faint white residue. Anna held it up, her expression hardening. "We'll need to test this, but it's not looking good for your wife, Mr. Lane." "She's not my wife anymore," I said, my voice tight. Anna's eyes softened slightly, as if she understood more than she let on. As Emily came out to see what was happening, her face turned pale at the sight of the officers. Her gaze darted to the bag in Daniel's hand, then to me. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Don't play dumb, Emily," I snapped. "This was in your stuff. Care to explain?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came. Anna stepped forward, her tone firm. "Ms. Lane, do you know anything about the substances we've found?" Emily stammered, her hands wringing together nervously. I don't know how that got there." Anna didn't look convinced. "We'll need you to come down to the station for questioning, and depending on what the lab results show, there may be charges." Watching Emily get handcuffed and led to the police cruiser was a surreal moment. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part, a quieter, more vulnerable part, just felt sad. This was the mother of my children, the woman I'd once trusted with my life. Daniel watched her go, shaking his head. "She's really messed up, hasn't she?" "You have no idea," I muttered, turning back toward the house. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers Sylvia had sent over. Custody filings, financial disclosures, divorce agreements. It was all there, a mountain of paperwork that would determine the future of my family. I thought about Hope and Jack, about how much they needed stability, love, and protection. Emily had already shown where her priorities lay, and it wasn't with them. As I picked up my pen to sign the first form, a knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Anna. "Mr. Lane," she said, her voice softer now. "Do you have a minute?" I stepped aside to let her in, gesturing toward the table. "Sure. What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I wanted to check in with you. Situations like this can get messy. I wanted to make sure you're holding up." I was surprised by her concern, but I nodded. "I'm managing. Barely, but I'm managing." Anna studied me for a moment, then sat down across from me. "You've got kids, right?" "2," I said. "Hope's 5 and Jack's 3. Her expression softened. "They're lucky to have you." I laughed bitterly. Yeah, we'll see if a judge agrees. Anna leaned forward, her gaze steady. If you need help, anything at all, just let me know. I've seen too many parents lose out because they didn't have the right support. Her words struck a chord. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. As Anna left, I picked up my phone and dialed Sylvia's number. We've got a new development, I said when she answered. Emily's been arrested. Possession of a controlled substance. Sylvia's voice was calm but firm. That's significant. We'll use it. I want full custody, I said, my voice steady. No compromise. We'll fight for it, Sylvia promised. But you need to be prepared for a battle. I hung up, feeling the weight of her words. Over the next few days, the house felt strangely quiet. Emily's absence was a void, but it was one I welcomed. The kids were still at her parents' house, safe for now, but I knew I couldn't leave them there for long. I worked tirelessly with Sylvia, gathering evidence and preparing for what I knew would be a contentious custody fight. Anna checked in periodically, her steady presence a surprising source of comfort. It's going to be okay, she said one evening as we stood in the driveway. You're doing everything right. Am I? I asked, doubt creeping into my voice. She nodded. You're fighting for your kids. That's what matters. By the time the weekend rolled around, I finally felt like I was regaining control. Emily's boxes were gone, the legal filings were in motion, and the kids were coming home soon. As I stood in the living room, looking at the family photos on the wall, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about winning a custody battle or finalizing a divorce. This was about rebuilding a life, a better life, for me and my children. And no matter how long it took or how hard the fight became, I was ready. The last of Emily's boxes left the house on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I stood by the window, arms crossed, watching as her brothers struggled to lift the mattress onto the rental truck. The rain dripped off the edge of the porch roof, each droplet like a tiny metronome, marking the end of one life and the tentative start of another. When the truck finally pulled out of the driveway, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The house felt empty now, quieter than it had any right to be. But for the first time in weeks, that silence wasn't suffocating. It was clean, open, a canvas waiting for me to decide what to paint on it next. Emily's departure was a milestone, but it wasn't the end of the story. The kids were still staying with their parents, and as much as I hated the arrangement, I couldn't bring them back until the legal waters were clearer. I spent the evening clearing out the remnants of her presence, the knickknacks she'd left behind, the floral curtains she'd insisted on, the framed photo of us from our honeymoon. I placed the photo in a box labeled miscellaneous and shoved it into the back of the closet. Out of sight, out of mind. By the time I was done, the house felt mine. Not completely, but it was a start. Anna showed up the next morning, her police cruiser parked neatly in the driveway. I opened the door to find her standing there, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. Morning, she said, her tone brisk but warm. Thought you could use this. I accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. Thanks, Colleen. She stepped inside, her eyes sweeping the living room. Looks like you've been busy. Had to, I replied. Can't exactly move forward with all the reminders lying around. Anna nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's smart. A clean slate helps. We sat in the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the freshly cleaned windows. Anna flipped open the folder, revealing the preliminary findings from the search of Emily's belongings. It's not good, she said, her voice measured. The test confirmed the powder was cocaine, and the mirror had traces of the same. This is enough to press charges. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words settling over me. What does this mean for custody? I asked. Anna hesitated, then said, It's definitely in your favor. But you'll need more than this to ensure full custody. Courts like to see a pattern of behavior, not just one incident. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's always more complicated than it should be, isn't it? She gave me a small smile. Unfortunately, yes. But you're on the right track, Michael. Keep doing what you're doing. Before she left, Anna glanced at the dining table, where two booster seats sat side by side. You miss them, don't you? She asked, her voice soft. Every second, I admitted. Her eyes lingered on the seats for a moment before she turned back to me. Bring them home soon. They need you. The kids came back 2 days later, their laughter filling the house like sunlight piercing through storm clouds. Hope was the first to notice the changes. "Daddy, where's Mommy's stuff?" she asked, her wide eyes scanning the room. I knelt down to her level, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Mommy's staying with Grandma and Grandpa for a while," I said gently. "But this is still our home, and we're going to make it even better, okay?" She nodded, though her little brow furrowed in thought. Jack, blissfully unaware, toddled over to the toy chest, already diving into his favorite trucks. That evening, I invited Anna over for dinner. It felt like a bold move, but I wanted the kids to meet her. She'd been a steady presence in my life these past weeks, and something about her calm demeanor felt right. When she arrived, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider and a small bouquet of flowers for Hope, the kids were instantly enchanted. "Are you a police officer?" Hope asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I am," Anna replied, kneeling to meet her gaze. "I help keep people safe." Hope's face lit up. "That's so cool. Can I be a police officer too?" Anna smiled. "Of course. You'd make a great officer." Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Hope peppered Anna with questions about her job, while Jack insisted on showing her every toy he owned. Anna handled it all with patience and grace, even when Jack spilled juice on her lap. "You're a natural," I said as we cleared the dishes, the kids giggling in the living room. Anna shrugged, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. "They're great kids, Michael. You've done a good job." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "Thanks," I said finally, my voice softer than I'd intended. As the night wound down, I walked Anna to her car. The air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny beacons. "Thanks for coming," I said. "It meant a lot to me, and to the kids." She hesitated, her hand on the car door. "I had a good time. They're lucky to have you, Michael." For a moment, our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. A quiet understanding, a flicker of possibility. "Good night, Anna," I said, stepping back. "Good night," she replied, her smile lingering as she drove away. After the kids were asleep, I sat in the living room, staring at the family photo I'd tucked away days earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. Things weren't perfect, and they probably wouldn't be for a long time. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't doing it alone. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically. No, the temperature was comfortable enough, but the atmosphere had an unshakable chill. Lawyers whispered to their clients, papers shuffled, and the judge's gavel came down with mechanical efficiency, punctuating rulings like clockwork. When our case was called, I rose from my seat, my pulse steady but my chest heavy. Emily was already at her table, her once polished appearance now dulled by months of chaos. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something to her, but she only nodded faintly, her eyes avoiding mine. Sylvia stood beside me, her confidence radiating. If I'd learned anything from the past weeks, it was that having someone like Sylvia in your corner could mean the difference between winning and losing. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. The recording, Emily's drug charges, her questionable behavior during supervised visits. When the recording played aloud in the courtroom, Emily's chilling words about not caring for the kids, there was a collective stillness, a weight that seemed to press down on everyone. I kept my expression neutral, even as my stomach twisted. Sylvia had prepared me for this moment, but hearing those words again, it never got easier. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her lawyer trying to keep her composed. I didn't look at her. Couldn't. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was firm. "Mr. Lane, given the evidence presented, the court awards you full custody of Hope and Jack. Ms. Lane will have supervised visitation rights twice per month, each visit limited to 4 hours." I exhaled, the weight I'd carried for so long lifting slightly. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough. Emily's lawyer made a weak attempt to argue for joint custody, but it was half-hearted at best. Even Emily seemed resigned, her shoulders slumping as the judge finalized the ruling. The financial settlement was next. Emily would receive half of our joint assets and a portion of the house's equity, but she'd cover her own legal fees. Sylvia had managed to deduct the loans I'd given her family from her share, a small but satisfying win. By the time the gavel came down for the last time, it was over. Sylvia turned to me, her expression softer now. "You did it, Michael. It's done." I nodded, but words felt inadequate. The ride home was quiet, the streets blurring past as my thoughts swirled. The kids were at daycare, blissfully unaware of the battle that had just ended. That thought gave me comfort. When I pulled into the driveway, the house stood there, unchanged but somehow different. It felt like mine now, not ours, not hers, but mine. The first thing I did was start planning renovations. I wanted the house to reflect this new chapter, to feel like a home again. The floral curtains were the first to go, replaced by simple, clean lines that let in more light. I painted the walls a warm gray, added crown molding, and tore out the old carpet in favor of hardwood floors. The bedroom was the biggest change. I got rid of the old bed, the one tainted by too many memories, and replaced it with a sturdy, darkwood frame that felt solid and unyielding, a symbol of permanence. The process was exhausting, but satisfying. Every brushstroke, every nail driven into the wood was a step toward reclaiming my space. Anna stopped by one evening, a pizza box in hand and a curious look in her eyes as she surveyed the changes. "Wow," she said, stepping inside. "You've been busy." "Had to," I replied, setting the pizza on the counter. I couldn't live with all the old reminders. She nodded, her gaze softening. "It looks great, Michael." "Really?" We ate in the living room, the kids sprawled out on the rug with their toys. Anna had a way with them, her humor and warmth drawing them in effortlessly. At one point, Jack climbed in her lap, holding up a toy truck. "Look, it's a fire truck." Anna grinned, playing along. "Wow, that's a cool truck. Does it put out fires?" Jack nodded enthusiastically, and for a moment, the house was filled with laughter. Later, after the kids were in bed, Anna and I sat on the porch, the cool night air wrapping around us. "You're good with them," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Anna shrugged, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "They're easy to love." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For being here. For everything." She met my gaze, her eyes searching mine. "You don't have to thank me, Michael. I'm here because I want to be." Over the next few weeks, Anna's visits became more frequent. Sometimes she'd bring dinner. Other times, we'd take the kids to the park or the zoo. Her presence was steady and grounding, a counterbalance to the chaos of rebuilding. She never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. But as the days turned into weeks, I found myself wanting to give more. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I showed Anna the newly finished bedroom. "This is amazing," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the bed frame. "You've done a great job." "Thanks," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It feels different now. Better." She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "So do you?" I raised an eyebrow. "I feel different." She nodded. "Stronger. More yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment, all I could do was nod. "Thanks, Anna," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Underscore 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 underscore. By the time the renovations were complete, the house felt like a new place. The kids loved their freshly painted rooms, and even the kitchen seemed brighter. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild, and a new life to navigate. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And with Anna by my side, I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. The knock came late, well past midnight. I was in the living room, the house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. The kids had been asleep for hours, and I was nursing a glass of bourbon, enjoying the rare peace. When the sound echoed through the hall, I frowned. No one visited at this hour. Opening the door, I expected to see a neighbor with a late-night emergency, or maybe even Anna, though she'd usually call first. What I didn't expect was Emily, leaning against the frame, barefoot and shivering in the crisp night air. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, and her hair hung limp around her shoulders. She clutched a thin sweater tightly around herself, the fabric too light to ward off the chill. "Emily," I said, my voice flat, masking the surge of emotions bubbling up inside me. "Michael," she whispered, her voice raw. I didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside, motioning her in. She moved slowly, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world pressed down on her. "Why are you here?" I asked once the door was closed, my tone measured. Her eyes filled with tears, and she sank onto the edge of the couch. "They turned on me," she said, her voice trembling. "My family, they've been awful, Michael. They took my money, my car, everything." She broke off, her hands trembling. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. A part of me wanted to slam the door on her pain, to remind her of what she'd done to me, to us. But another part, one I'd tried to bury, felt a twinge of pity. "Why now?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "I've been trying to fix things," she said, wiping at her face. "Therapy. Rehab. I'm better, Michael. I know I don't deserve it, but I need a place to stay. Just for a while. Please." The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, I nodded, but my voice was firm. "The guest room," I said. "It's temporary, and there are rules." She nodded quickly, her relief palpable. "You'll be here for the kids, Emily. Not for me, and not for anything else. You'll contribute to the household, cleaning, cooking, whatever needs to be done, and you'll stay in therapy." "Agreed." "Yes," she said, her voice small. "Thank you, Michael. I mean it." I nodded curtly, motioning toward the hall. "The guest room's down there. I'll grab you some blankets." The next morning, Hope and Jack were thrilled to see her. "Mommy," Hope squealed, throwing her arms around Emily's legs. "You're here." Jack followed suit, babbling happily as Emily knelt to hug them both. The joy on their faces was a stark contrast to the wariness I felt watching from the kitchen. "Mommy's staying in the guest room for a little while," I told them, keeping my tone light. "She's helping out around the house." The kids didn't question it, their innocent trust a painful reminder of how much they'd missed her. As the days passed, Emily began to settle into a routine. She woke early to make breakfast for the kids, pack their lunches, and even took on some of the household chores without prompting. I kept my distance, focusing on work and the kids while she quietly rebuilt her presence in the house. Her once sharp edges had softened, and though I remained cautious, I couldn't deny the effort she was making. One evening, after the kids were asleep, Emily and I sat in the living room, the tension between us like a taut wire. She broke the silence first. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't do it for you," I replied evenly. "I did it for the kids." She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I know, but I'm trying, Michael. I'm trying to be better." I studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity. "Keep trying," I said finally. "The kids deserve it." Emily began therapy again, attending weekly sessions with a counselor she found through her rehab program. She even invited me to one session, saying it might help us co-parent more effectively. I agreed, though not without hesitation. Sitting in that small office, listening to Emily talk about her struggles and regrets, was harder than I expected. "I lost sight of everything that mattered," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I let my family manipulate me, and I let my own insecurities destroy what we had. I can never undo that, Michael, but I want to make things right for Hope and Jack." The counselor glanced at me, her expression neutral. "Michael, how do you feel about Emily's efforts so far?" I hesitated before answering. "I think she's trying," I said carefully. "But trust doesn't come back overnight. It's going to take time." Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand." Over the weeks, Emily slowly integrated into a supporting role in the household. She took the kids to school, helped them with homework, and even started cooking dinners, a skill she'd rarely practiced during our marriage. The kids seemed happier with her around, though they were too young to understand the complexity of our situation. For them, having both parents under the same roof was enough. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Anna stopped by unexpectedly. She took one look at Emily, who was folding laundry in the living room, and raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see her here," Anna said quietly as I joined her on the porch. "It's complicated, I admitted. She needed a place to stay, and the kids were thrilled to have her back. But it's temporary." Anna studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You're a better man than most, Michael. Letting her back in after everything? That's not easy." "It's not about being better," I said, running a hand through my hair. "It's about doing what's right for the kids." Despite the progress Emily was making, I kept strict boundaries. Our interactions remained polite but distant, and I made it clear that our relationship was strictly co-parenting. Emily seemed to accept this, though I occasionally caught her looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or longing. Whatever it was, I ignored it. The walls I'd built around myself were too high to let her back in. Months passed, and the house settled into a new rhythm. Emily continued her therapy, her demeanor softening further with each passing week. She even started dressing differently, simpler, brighter clothes that reflected the changes she was trying to make. Though I appreciated her efforts, I remained cautious. I'd seen how easily things could fall apart, and I wasn't willing to risk it again. For now, this arrangement worked. The kids were happy, the house was stable, and I was slowly finding my footing again. One evening, as I tucked Hope in a bed, she looked up at me with wide, earnest eyes. "Daddy," she said, "are you and Mommy going to get back together?" Her question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "Mommy and I are working together to take care of you and Jack, but we're not going to be like we were before." Hope seemed to accept this, her little brow furrowing in thought. "But you're still friends, right?" I hesitated, then nodded. "We're trying, Hope. We're trying." As I left her room, I couldn't shake the weight of her question. Emily and I might never be what we once were, but for the sake of our kids, I could try to find some semblance of peace. For now, that was enough. The promotion announcement came during the Monday morning staff meeting, catching me off guard. I had spent the weekend poring over client reports and barely slept, expecting the week to start with another fire to put out. Instead, Laura, seated at the head of the long conference table, smiled warmly at me as she stood to speak. "I have some exciting news," she began, her voice calm but carrying a note of enthusiasm. "As you all know, we've been restructuring the leadership team to better align with our goals. And today, I'm thrilled to announce that Michael Lane will be stepping into the role of vice president." The room erupted into applause. For a moment, I froze, the weight of the words sinking in. VP. It was the position I'd worked toward for years, but hearing it out loud felt surreal. "Michael," Laura continued, motioning for me to stand, "your dedication and leadership have been instrumental in our success. We're lucky to have you." As I stood to address the room, I caught her eye. There was something unspoken in her gaze, a mix of pride and something warmer, something deeper. Later that evening, as the office emptied out, I found myself in Laura's office. She called me in to discuss the transition, but the tone of the conversation quickly shifted. "Congratulations again, Michael," she said, her smile soft. "You've earned this." "Thanks, Laura," I replied, leaning against the edge of her desk. "But I have to admit, it feels strange." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Strange how?" "Like I'm standing at a crossroads," I said slowly. "This promotion, it's everything I've worked for. But there's another part of me that feels like I need to take a different path." Laura tilted her head, studying me. "What kind of path?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "A personal one. One that might complicate things professionally." Her eyes widened slightly, realization dawning. "Michael." I met her gaze, my heart pounding. "Laura, you're one of the most important people in my life, and I can't keep pretending that's just about work." The silence stretched between us, heavy with possibility. Finally, she smiled. A small, uncertain smile, but a smile nonetheless. "I didn't think you'd ever say it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed softly, the tension breaking. I didn't think I'd ever get the chance. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. After the initial shock of my confession, Laura and I began navigating the complexities of our new relationship. We agreed to keep things quiet for a while, allowing us time to figure out how to balance our personal and professional lives. But as the days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that we didn't want to keep hiding. At the next board meeting, Laura made the announcement herself, her tone confident yet unapologetic. "Before we begin," she said, addressing the room, "I'd like to share some personal news. Michael and I have decided to pursue a relationship outside of work. To ensure transparency, we've reviewed company policy and will take steps to avoid conflicts of interest." There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a ripple of murmurs. Then, one of the senior board members, a woman named Elaine, smiled warmly. "Well, it's about time," she said, breaking the tension. The room erupted into laughter, and just like that, the moment passed. Our relationship blossomed in ways I hadn't expected. Laura's warmth and humor complemented her sharp intellect, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of balance, of stability. She met Hope and Jack soon after, and their bond was instant. Laura had a way with them, her natural kindness drawing them in like a magnet. Hope adored her, often dragging her into tea parties and elaborate dollhouse adventures. Jack, ever the energetic one, found a willing playmate in Laura, who didn't hesitate to crawl on the floor and build block towers with him. As the months passed, our lives began to intertwine more deeply. Emily continued her role in the household, settling into a routine as a nanny. She remained cordial and professional, keeping her distance while fulfilling her responsibilities. It was an unconventional setup, but somehow it worked. One evening, as Laura and I sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Michael," she said, her voice soft, "have you thought about what the future looks like for us? For this family we're building?" I nodded, taking her hand in mine. "Every day," I said honestly. "And I know one thing for sure. I don't want to do it without you." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, with a smile, she leaned in and kissed me. Our wedding was a quiet, intimate affair. Hope served as the flower girl, her curls bouncing as she scattered petals down the aisle. Jack, ever the ham, carried the rings with a proud grin, earning laughs from the small group of friends and family in attendance. Emily was there, sitting in the second row with a faint smile. She had offered to help with the kids during the ceremony, and though the gesture was small, it meant more than she probably realized. As Laura and I exchanged vows, the weight of the past lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. Blending our families came with challenges, but it also brought unexpected joys. Emily continued to live in the guest room, her role evolving into that of a trusted caregiver for Hope and Jack. Though we kept things platonic, the respect between us grew as we worked together to create a stable environment for the kids. Laura, ever supportive, embraced the dynamic with grace. She and Emily developed a cordial relationship, united by their shared love for the children. For the first time in years, our home felt whole. As I stood in the kitchen one evening, watching Laura help Hope with her homework while Jack played with Emily in the living room, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. It had been messy, painful, and filled with doubt. But standing there, surrounded by laughter and love, I knew it had all been worth it. Laura glanced up, catching my eye, and smiled. "What?" she asked, her tone teasing. "Nothing," I said, returning her smile. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Well, don't forget it, Mr. Lane." "I won't," I promised. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Life has a way of surprising you, even when you think you've seen it all. Laura's pregnancy was one of those surprises. She told me on a quiet Sunday morning while we were making breakfast. Hope and Jack were in the backyard, their laughter floating through the open window as we moved in sync around the kitchen. "Michael," she said, her voice unusually soft, "I need to tell you something." I turned, spatula in hand, and froze at the look in her eyes, a mix of joy, nerves, and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'm pregnant," she said, her lips curving into a cautious smile. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, my mind racing to catch up. And then, as her words sank in, a wave of emotion hit me. I dropped the spatula, crossed the distance between us, and pulled her into my arms. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice muffled against my chest. "More than happy," I said, my voice thick. "Laura, this is amazing." She laughed, the sound light and full of relief. "Good, because we're going to need all the help we can get." Help came in the form of Rose. After the fallout with her FBI ex, she'd taken a break from law enforcement to reassess her life. When I mentioned our growing household, she didn't hesitate. "Need a hand?" she asked over the phone, her tone casual, but her intent clear. I didn't even have to think about it. "Always." Rose moved into the spare room a few weeks later, her presence immediately grounding. She had a knack for making everyone feel at ease, from Hope and Jack to Emily, who still tread carefully around the dynamics of the house. It wasn't long before the house became a hub of activity. With Laura's pregnancy progressing, Rose took on more responsibilities, from grocery runs to helping Hope with her science projects. Emily remained the kids' primary caretaker during the day, her dedication earning her a newfound respect in the household. Despite the chaos, we found a rhythm, a balance that felt oddly natural. The unexpected arrival of Margaret, a psychiatrist Laura had met through a mutual friend, was the final piece of the puzzle. Margaret was sharp, insightful, and unflinchingly honest. When Laura invited her over for dinner, I was initially skeptical. "I think she could help," Laura said as we set the table. "For all of us." "Help with what?" I asked, glancing at her curiously. "Everything," she replied with a knowing smile. Margaret was an immediate hit with the kids, her quick wit and knack for storytelling earning their admiration within minutes. By the end of the night, even Rose, who rarely opened up to strangers, was laughing at one of Margaret's anecdotes. After the kids were in bed, Margaret leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. "You've built something incredible here, Michael," she said. "Unconventional, sure, but incredible all the same." I chuckled, running a hand through my hair. "It doesn't always feel that way." "No family is perfect," she said, her tone kind. "But the love and respect in this house? That's rare." Margaret began visiting regularly, her presence quickly becoming another layer of support. She offered guidance when tensions arose, her calm demeanor a steadying force in our often chaotic lives. One evening, as we sat in the living room discussing the logistics of Laura's upcoming maternity leave, Margaret surprised me with a proposition. "Have you ever considered making me a permanent fixture here?" she asked, her smile teasing, but her eyes serious. I raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking to move in?" She shrugged. "Why not? You've already got a full house. One more won't hurt." Laura laughed, her hand resting on her growing belly. "I think it's a great idea." Rose nodded in agreement, a rare grin lighting up her face. And just like that, Margaret became part of the family. As the months passed, the house buzzed with activity. Hope and Jack adapted effortlessly to the changes, their bond with Laura growing stronger by the day. Emily, though still navigating her place in the household, continued to contribute in meaningful ways, her growth evident in the way she handled challenges with grace. Rose took charge of the household security, her background in law enforcement ensuring that we all felt safe. Margaret, true to her word, became a pillar of emotional support, her insights helping us navigate the complexities of our blended family. And Laura was the heart of it all, her strength and warmth holding us together even on the most chaotic days. The day Laura went into labor was one of both chaos and joy. Rose drove us to the hospital, her usual calm replaced by a rare sense of urgency. Emily stayed behind with the kids, promising to keep them entertained until we returned. When our daughter, Lily, was born, I felt a surge of emotion that left me breathless. Holding her tiny form in my arms, I realized just how far we'd come, how much we'd endured to reach this moment. Bringing Lily home was a turning point. The house, once fractured and uncertain, now felt whole. Hope and Jack adored their baby sister, their laughter filling the rooms as they took turns doting on her. Laura and I navigated the challenges of parenting a newborn with the support of our unconventional family, each member playing a vital role. One evening, as I stood on the porch with Rose and Margaret, watching the sunset, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Think we've got enough people in this house? I asked, my tone light. Margaret laughed. It's not about numbers, Michael. It's about the people who show up when it matters. Rose nodded, her gaze distant but content. You got a good thing here, Lane. Don't mess it up. I chuckled, taking a sip of my drink. I'll do my best. Life wasn't perfect. No life ever is. But as I stood there, surrounded by laughter and love, I knew we'd built something special. A family. Unconventional, messy, and complicated, but ours. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.